Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me as always is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well, thank you for asking, Rory, and we are both so delighted that you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've joined us at episode 208, and today we're looking at 3 topics, starting with our Counselling Foundations, where we revisit the importance of the foundations on which we build our counselling practice. And today we're going to be speaking about rapport in Counselling Foundations. We then move on to focus in self, and that's the area where we recognize that you as the practitioner are the heart of your practice, and we need to look at ourselves. And we're going to be looking at managing your inner therapist today. Interesting topic. And then we end episode 208 by dipping our toe into Practice Matters, which is our section where we look at something that may come up in practice, how we can improve our practice relationships with our clients. And today we have an interview with Kate Williams speaking about building relational depth with our clients. So there you have it. So let's start off episode 208. And Rory, we're speaking about something that is so important. I think the foundation of what counselling is all about, and that's that rapport in counselling. And I'm thinking back to my very first steps in counselling, learning about counselling, and rapport was one of the first things that we learn about when you kind of start your counselling studies. But I recognise it's something that goes with you throughout the arc of your practice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ken. Spot on. The evidence really is indisputable now that the biggest part of positive outcomes in therapy is the relationship. You know, it's not the modality. The modality is about 15%. If you think of it as a pie and you're cutting it into slices, then, you know, the slice that is the theory or the modality is about 15%. And a big slice of that pie, I think it's about 25 or 30%, is the relationship. And rapport is how we start building that relationship with someone we've never met. And it starts off with being approachable, friendly, even saying to clients when they come in, when I see clients, I say, how have you got here today? And how was you traveling? Showing real interest in that person. And it's a foundation building skill. Rapport is a foundation building skill. One of the most powerful things, I think, in human interaction is being known and being known by others. And I'm paraphrasing Nietzsche there. And it's really important. And for the person who comes in, maybe they're vulnerable, maybe they don't know what to expect from therapy, maybe they're a little bit frightened, maybe they think they're going to be judged. To have this warm, accepting, friendly person, another human being, to speak to is absolutely incredibly important. I think rapport is one of the most under-considered skills that we have in our skill set, Ken.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe a good idea to start off by defining what rapport is. And you've touched on many elements of rapport there, Rory. But rapport is really about creating an environment or a feeling that the person is being seen. So they come in, and instead of them coming into a cold clinical process that they're going to go through, they are greeted warmly by a friendly person who really cares. And that's really important. You can't dial this in, as I call it. You got to really have that congruence of really wanting to make a difference for others, to be there for others in their journey. And that rapport, that bonding, as it were, of two human beings is really rare. You've mentioned it, Rory. It's a rare thing. We don't find it out in life. Now, we may have rapport with our friends. We may go on a course or a team building exercise and develop rapport with our colleagues and our workmates, people that we're seeing on a regular basis. But rapport takes time to develop. If you think about a first day in school, when you're new in the class and everyone else is new, or a new day in a new job, or a new day with a new group of people when you start your studies for counselling, you're in a group of strangers, and rapport takes time to build. And without rapport, there is no trust. Therefore, you will only share parts of yourself. So to think about rapport, think about your experience with rapport. And then when we speak about rapport in counselling, we're talking about almost an acceleration of the rapport process. We want to kind of offer that rapport, build that rapport quickly, because we're going to go into some potentially deep material that would maybe take a person years or decades before they would dare share it with a friend that they had rapport with. So we want to build that rapport pretty quickly. And it is rare in life. Usually if somebody is being nice to us, a stranger who we don't know, it is either a professional facade that they're putting on, customer service they call it, or they want something from us. So if you want to see really good rapport building skills, look to a salesperson, because they need to get that sale. So they want something for you. So they build rapport, but they have an ulterior motive. Whereas within counseling, our rapport building is 100% in service of that client.
We do see rapport in lots of other areas of our life, and you've touched on sales. If I go out to eat, we have our place we like to eat, and the people who serve us, they're wonderful. They build rapport. They seem, and I believe, genuinely interested in us and what's going on in our lives, and they share a little bit about themselves, and it gives you a feeling of kinship. It gives you a feeling of belonging. And I think that's something that's so lacking in our society. You know, as humans, we look to belong. We look to be part of something bigger than us. And rapport is the bridge that builds that. We can walk over that bridge and be connected. And you're absolutely right. For me, it's about passion in the work, about showing the client that you're there for them, that this is their time, their space, that they can use that time however they want it, and you're there. And one of the most beautiful phrases that I ever came across regarding connection was actually from Carl Rogers. Hardly surprising, anybody who listens to the podcast will know that I love a good Carl Rogers phrase or quote. And he talks about people of the future, and he said, in the future, people will be able to develop relationships very quickly, where in the past it would have taken a lifetime to achieve. I paraphrase there. And what he was basically saying is that if you're using rapport, using what we sometimes refer to as the core conditions, empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard, then people will build very quickly, very in-depth relationships. And it's sometimes referred to as low-gravity relationships, where they can withstand a bit of bumping, a bit of emotional weather. And that is really important within counselling, because sometimes, as we know, counselling for clients, it can get worse before it gets better. So having building that relational, building those foundations, absolutely critical.
Oh, yes. I want to clap and wave my hands in the air as you're saying that, Rory. I'm subscribing to every word of that. And if you think about the counselling relationship, and you said it needs to withstand the bumps, there are times within the counselling relationship where it can be really challenging, where as the therapist, you need to be there in a challenging role for the client, for them to face their incongruence and obviously for their benefit. And the relationship can feel strained at times. It really, really can. We speak about moments of movement where a client has a light bulb moment where they realize something, and that's not always a positive within the client. It can sometimes be a negative. And what I mean by that, I'll give an example. A client going, all these people in my life, they're like this and like this and like this, and that's why I'm so unhappy. And maybe reaching a realization of, hold on, it's not them, it's me. It's me. And, we might, as the therapist, go, yay, moment of movement. Now that you've really understood that, you can now work on that. But for that person, that can be devastating. It really can. So there can be moments of devastation within a counselling relationship for the client. And having the rapport, having that warm environment to envelope them, during that time is absolutely critical. And the truth is, it's unlikely that it would get to having those moments of movement if the rapport and the trust wasn't there in the first place. They are necessary for that psychological contact, for the person to know somebody else is caring about me and here for me, and I'm in contact with this other human being. Those core conditions, as you spoke about, Rory, the facilitative conditions, as we call them, being reflected from the counsellor themselves, wrapping around the environment that is that counselling relationship. So we've said what rapport is. We've spoken about how important it is and how it kind of arcs its way through the counselling relationship. But how do we do it? Do we get our book of rapport out and go, right, chapter 1 of rapport? So what are some tips on rapport? So I'm going to start off with before the session. It starts before the session. It's about the preparation that you put in. And if you look back to episode 207 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, in that episode, we spoke about a first client session and how maybe before you see that very first client, you might think about, who is this person? Who might they be coming in? And this is a great way to develop the rapport before the person even comes in. You're preparing yourself for them. You are getting ready, creating space within yourself for this new person coming in. And even if it's a returning client, for them coming back in, you might think about the last session you had with them. You might consider what might be going on for them so that you're in that mindset, as opposed to, I don't know, browsing on the internet and being interrupted when a client arrives. So that would be a great starting point, is the preparation of self for the reception of this client. Recognition that we are there for them. It is all about them. Genuinely caring about what we do. We spoke about the wounded healer only recently within our podcast, of why we become counselors in the first place. And if those wise ones that follow our podcast on a regular basis will see how this all knits together and becomes the mat that is counseling. Because rapport requires us to remind ourselves, why are we here? Why are we doing this? We do it because we really, really care. Giving that attentive focus, listening to the client, actively listening to what they bring, and most importantly for rapport, looking through their frame of reference, taking our thoughts, beliefs, what's right, what's wrong, putting that one side in service of this person in front of us. That builds rapport.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ken. And I like the idea of taking some time just before you see the client to clear the tables. I use the analogy of going for a meal. You know, we've all probably at some time gone for a meal, and we've sometimes gone for a meal and the table hasn't been cleared, and it's full of other people's stuff. You know, half-eaten meals and half drunk coffee or whatever, and it feels really uncomfortable. It feels like there's no care being there, and when we go to a table that's beautifully laid out and it's for us, it's there for us. It's so important, and I think the analogy is a good one in terms of clearing our minds of what's going on, you know, making sure that when we see the client, this is a brand new person, you know, and the questions in our mind are very clear to me. Who is this person? Where are we going to go on their journey? And holding that space, because ultimately rapport leads to permission. If you build good rapport, it elicits permission for clients to speak about the unspeakable things, those things that they cannot talk about to anybody else. As I said, it's a bridge. It allows clients then to connect with you and to share what's going on. And as I say, the research is in. The relationship, no matter what modality you practice, is one of the most important ingredients, a strong ingredient in good therapeutic outcomes.
I love that metaphor, Rory. If it is a metaphor, I always get confused of what the definition of a metaphor is, but with you using the table analogy of arriving there, and I can certainly relate to that, and hopefully you as our listener have had that experience when you go into a restaurant that haven't finished clearing the table. The interesting thing is, when the person comes over and clears the table while you're sat there, and then the table is clear, everything's moved away, they've squished it down and run a cloth over it. For me, and I just speak for myself, I still don't feel 100% comfortable having watched that process. But had I come in and that had just been done and sat down, I would be in a different frame of mind. And I think that's a really good analogy that you've used there, Rory. The clearing of the table, preparing for that person that comes in. And of course, if it comes to rapport and you're thinking about skills, and you look to your counselling skills, what are good skills for building rapport? And the number one rapport building skill is silence. Silence.
Yes.
Just being there and allowing that person to be, showing with your body language, with your facial expression, with your whole being, that you are truly listening to this person. And out there in the non-counselling world, we maybe think rapport is about us finding something that we can, a mutual interest, or telling a person about something and saying, oh yes, I had that happen to me, so that we're talking about something and almost playing chat tennis. Well, it's different in counselling. In counselling, it is a way of being. It is that empathic listening, that true caring, and the skill of silence, so useful in building rapport. And it's also almost counterintuitive, isn't it? You'd think that to build rapport, you've got to chat a lot and find common areas, but you don't. Just truly being there, because that is so rare in the world, where somebody is there just to truly listen to what we have to bring.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, it speaks strongly to something that we know about in therapy, and that's being present. Being present and being connected to the client is just so important. And rapport, again, is the bridge to that. It's a bridge skill, basically. I've used the word bridge a lot in this section, but it's a bridge skill. It really is.
Yeah, and I think if there's any takeaway from this, it's consider rapport again. Yes, we go into those first steps of counselling. This is coming full circle on where we started here, and we learn about rapport. It's one of the first lessons. But how often do we stop and think about it again? You could have been in practice for 10, 15 years. Do you think about rapport? Or is it just an automatic? Is it just a given? Have a think. Pause, journal about rapport, think about your own life, think about areas of interaction on a daily basis that you might go into where you don't feel there's rapport, where you feel they're dialing it in, where you feel there's a veneer of professionalism being presented, or where you feel just ignored, I guess. And then think of areas of your life where you do feel rapport. That person that might serve you coffee when you're ordering coffee, and there's just something about it that just makes it special. What is that something that makes it special? How did they build that rapport? What causes that magic connection? And if we think about it, put our mind there in service of our clients, journal about it, leads to our growth, and it's our growth in service of those that we serve.
Absolutely. And speak about it in supervision.
Oh,
if you happen to be in supervision as a student or a qualified colleague, put it on the agenda to talk about, because I think it's something that probably isn't spoken about a lot in supervision. But it's so I'm come back to my bridge again. I can't get bridges out of my head, Ken. But it's such a bridge skill, and it is that it's foundations. If you build a strong foundation, then it will withstand the weather and the emotional weather and the odd kind of gusts and storms that could kind of run around the therapeutic engagement. So rapport, a very, very, very important skill.
We got a handout. It's one of Rory's super duper handouts, and it's on rapport. So really beautiful overview of rapport. And I certainly used it as the base for my research for our chat today. So thank you very much, Rory. And if you want to get Rory's super duper handout that you can either keep digitally or you can print it out, put it on file, refer back to that, maybe in your considerations of rapport, it's free. All you need to do is go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. Click on our podcast tab. It's in the top menu, and just find episode 208. Right there on that page, you'll find our show notes from today's episode, where we kind of link out to more information on topics, and you can download from that very page just by putting in your email address, and we'll send it through to you, Rory's handout on Rapport. So that is Rapport. That is our Counselling Foundations. We now move on to our focus on self. And on Focus on Self today, we're speaking about managing your inner therapist, Rory.
Ooh, yes. Well, yes. It's fascinating. One of the things that comes up a lot in our Facebook page, and if you're not a member of our Facebook page, come on in. Just go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We're a closed group, but knock on the door and our friendly moderation team will let you in, join the party. Thousands and thousands of like-minded people studying in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We've got students, we have qualified colleagues, supervisors, tutors, and all talking and debating the important aspects of counselling and psychotherapy, and having a little bit of fun too occasionally, I have to say. And one of the things that comes up, certainly for new trainees, is when family members or friends say, "You're counselling me, you've turned your counselling, put your counselling hat on, or you've switched your counselling switch on." And, it does happen. And one of the things I can relate from my training was this way of being, this listening and reflecting back, was a completely new concept to me. It was just amazing. And what was equally amazing was when it was used, the reaction that other people had. And I think sometimes we need to be thoughtful about switching on our inner therapist in situations that doesn't warrant it. And recently I had a conversation with someone, just someone I have a passing conversation with, a neighbour, someone I see occasionally, got talking a little bit about their lives, and just out of just politeness and just my inner therapist kind of surfacing, I said that must have been really, really difficult. And I could see that the people welling up, the other person's welling up. And I thought, I need to back off here, because A, I'm not their therapist. B, it's the middle of the street. And C, this person may not want to go there.
Yeah.
I don't want to take somebody to a very difficult place in the middle of a street while holding their sandwiches. They didn't just come back they bought some sandwiches. And I think it's very easy, certainly as a new trainee, or someone who's training, not to be able to manage the volume control. And I think this is what I come to. I like my analogies or my metaphors. And I always think of our skill set like those old hi-fi amplifiers with bass, treble, and balance on, and you could turn the things and alter the tone. And that's exactly what we do when we use our skills or we use our way of being. We're altering the tone of our engagements with people. And sometimes we need to turn down our inner therapist. We need to turn down maybe the volume control, or maybe we need just to turn down the empathy switch, because sometimes people don't want to be counselled in situations where they've not agreed to it. And I think this comes up a lot in our Facebook group, where people, I think, are using those skills. It's an excellent way of being. It builds relationships, but I think sometimes you can just overcook the egg, Ken.
Yes. It's interesting. There's two sides to it that you mentioned, Rory. The one being the perception from others that we might be using counselling skills, even when we're not. And we hear that a lot from students when we were training students at practice level. Rory and I would often hear that a partner or somebody within the house would hear comments like, "Oh, don't you be using your counselling skills on me," when they weren't. They were just having a discussion with the person, or maybe even a disagreement, or whatever it is. You can be kind of accused of it. That's the one side of it. The other side of it, I think the more important side, and the side that we can take responsibility on, is what you've discussed, Rory, where we find ourselves being drawn in to this way of being. And it is a way of being. Carl Rogers speaks about it as being a way of being, where we find ourselves acting in that person-centered way, when we find ourselves acting with empathy, unconditional positive regard, congruence, maybe find ourselves uttering counselling skills, like you mentioned in your example there. Oh, that must have been really, you basically doing a small reflection back of an empathic reflection back. That must be really hard for you. And these are powerful skills. It is a powerful way of being, and that is why in counselling training it's kind of drummed into you that counselling is a managed activity. It happens at a certain time in a certain place for the sole benefit of the client, that both know what is happening, that there is a psychological contact where the client's coming in and knows why they're coming in. They come in, and then it's protected by contracting, that confidentiality is protected, and all of that, of course, vanishes as soon as you step out of that therapy room and out of that relationship. So from an ethical standpoint, we don't want to find ourselves going there. But this is, I guess the balance is, I do certainly recognize within my own life, I changed as a person. My way of being changed. I became more empathic. I became more accepting of myself and others, and I became more congruent as a result of my training. And it's not necessarily something that I can turn off, because it is who I am today. I am different to how I was. But I think there is that line, and I think you recognize that line. And that was a really good example, Rory, and I'm so grateful that you brought that. You recognized that line. You were speaking to someone, and you were reacting empathically, not because you wanted to be a counselor, but because of who you are. And you saw, hold on a second, emotion is coming here. And I think that is what is important. You are able to go, hold on a second, let me back off here. Let me go to silence. Silence is always a very safe place. Good
default position.
A really good place to go is to go to silence and a nod and a smile. And I also think that you know, when you use those, and I'm going to use the term superpowers because they can appear like superpowers, you're eliciting permission, and I think, you know, all of our counselling interactions is about eliciting permission, either on a conscious level, where we're saying, tell me a little bit more about that, or we're offering our way of being, and subconsciously people feel that they can tell us everything. And I think it's a wonderful skill to have, and it's a wonderful skill set. And gosh, don't we wish, you know, our leaders and everybody else had those skills? It'd be lovely, wouldn't it? We'd live in a lovely world. I suspect that we'd live in a world of oversharing and unfinished processes. And one of the things about using your skills in a therapeutic environment is it's a container. You can contain it. It has a defined beginning, middle, and end. And when you use them in a social situation, very, 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 very different, because there's no container for that, and that can be quite damaging. And you're absolutely right. Recently, I purchased something where I needed to fill some paperwork in, and the person who was attending to me asked what I did for a living, and I usually say I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. And my wife, who's terribly proud of what I do, terribly proud of what I do, said he's a counsellor, and that was it. That was it. We're in a full blown therapy session, and what I had to do was I had to say, well, you know, I could give you some information on that. I can't counsel you because obviously I'm not your therapist. And after a little while, I said maybe seeing a therapist would be useful for that. Maybe and give you some information where to find, but and join that line. And when we finished, my wife said, I never realized. I said, well, that just happens, you know. And what I could say, and perhaps what my wife couldn't, because my wife isn't a trained therapist, was the person was very, what we call leaky. She was giving very strong signals out that something was very, very difficult. A lovely person. And I was able to share some relevant information, signpost, act professionally, and disengage from that part of the interaction. And I think that that's something that you need to think about. Many years ago, and I may have told this story before, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I taught students who said to me, are you a counsellor all the time? And I said, no. I said, I have times when I counsel, and then I have lots of other aspects and facets to my life. And she said to me, well, what would happen if your next door neighbour knocked on the door and asked you to counsel them? I'd say, well, I can't do that, but I can help you I can certainly signpost you to some help and help you there. And she said, oh, you're terribly harsh. I was called harsh. You're harsh, Rory. Terribly harsh. She said, my next door neighbour's a counsellor, and she listens to everybody that comes to her with a problem. And then without missing a beat and without any form of irony, she said, mind you, she's had a few nervous breakdowns. Yeah. And it's like,
Yes, possibly she would have if she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. So, usually with great power comes great responsibility. I think that's from Superman, isn't it? The film Superman. So I think
good quote, Rory.
It's a good quote. It could be Superman. It's a superhero quote. So I think if you've got those powers, those superpowers, use them wisely.
Yeah. And this section is called Focus on Self. It's about self-care, recognizing that we need to look after ourselves in order to be there in service of others. And part of that is working within a professional framework, within the boundaries that counselling gives us. And when we step outside of that, being all things to all people all the time, that is not self-care. That can lead us to burnout. It can be dangerous for those that speak to us. And it can lead us to burnout, and it's not in service of us, and it's not in service of our clients. And there is that tripwire. Of you're a counsellor. Oh, well, then you'll understand this then. Boof. And there it is. And without you having a chance or being able to take a breath, the presentations are coming through. And we can't tell you what to do, and that's not what the Counselling Tutor Podcast is about. We're here to discuss topics. We're just two colleagues. We chat about topics. We don't say we're right. We just say this is us chatting about it, and the encouragement is that you think about it. How might you react in a situation like that? Do you have a planned escape route, as it were? If you're in a building, one of the first things they do is they say, if there's a fire, this is what you do. If you get into a situation where somebody is coming to you and expecting that you might counsel them outside of a counselling environment, how might you manage that? What might you do? If you plan it at the time that they're bringing the stuff, then you might be doing some quick tap dancing mind work. But if you take some time to think about it beforehand, journal about it, it gives you an opportunity. And then the other side of it, before we leave this topic, Rory, that you were mentioning is you can't have it turned on all of the time. And I think this is about being kind to self. I certainly find myself acting at times. I will catch myself, and I will almost hit myself over the head with a big stick and go, well, that wasn't very person-centered, and that wasn't that wasn't particularly unconditional positive regard. That wasn't very empathic. And I almost measure myself against the better self that I take into therapy. Now, the self that I take into therapy is still me. Of course, it's still me. It is a congruent self, but it is me being my best in service of that client. And it's a way of being within that session. And yes, I take elements of and aspects of that out into my life, but they're not there all the time. And I sometimes get frustrated, and I sometimes I might say a harsh word here and there. And that's because I'm human. So when we're talking about the inner therapist, it's also about going, it's all right. It's all right to be human as well. You don't have to hold yourself to the standards that take place within the therapeutic rooms.
No, and I think that if you try to do that, then you may very well struggle a bit in life. Sometimes you have to be directive, and sometimes you have to put yourself first. And I think that's a lesson that's sometimes a little bit difficult to learn. You learn this almost like a superpower, this way of being. But it is about the volume control. And the thing is that, anybody who's got a hi-fi amplifier will know you can play it loud for only a short period of time before you burn the circuit boards out.
Speakers blow. Yes.
And I think that it's like our car engine. You can rev it high only for a short time before the engine gets damaged. And I think it's the same for our core being. If we turn on our skills and they're turned up to full volume all the time, what happens is you get burnout. It's as simple as that. You burn out, or you get compassion fatigue. And I think that we save our best selves, if you like, sometimes for those intimate moments with our family and those very precious moments in the therapy room. So don't feel too bad if you've complained about the cold coffee in a restaurant, or the undercooked vegetables, and you've called it as, it's a judgment, because that's being human. And I think sometimes it's also about putting yourself first, which is important.
There it is. That is focus on self. And I loved that topic. And if you enjoyed it too, there's an opportunity to continue the discussion. As Rory said, it's a discussion that came up on our Facebook group. Go and join that Facebook group and have the chat and suggest your topics there as well. Facebook, Counselling Tutor, knock on the door, we'll let you in. So moving on now to Practice Matters, where we look at an element that we may come across in our own practice, or something that may benefit us in our practice. And this certainly will. It's a lecture that was done for our Counsellor CPD library. And Rory, you touched base with Kate Williams, who did this lecture, and she speaks about something so important as building relational depth with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like a fitting end to this podcast. We've talked about rapport and managing the inner therapy, all about relationships. And Kate gives us a wonderful overview about how to take those skills, how to take that way of being we've discussed, and develop that relational depth, that low gravity relationship where we as therapists can engage with our clients, and our clients can feel they can speak about all the aspects of their life in a safe, contained environment. And I interviewed her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Kate Williams, who's done an absolutely fantastic lecture for our Counsellor CPD library on building relational depth with traumatised clients. So, Kate, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So I wonder, is there any specific reason that we would think about relational depth with traumatised clients as opposed to relational depths with clients in general?
Well, I mean, that's a really big question, and there's a couple of different answers there. So first of all, I really like the quote by Peter Levine, which I'm just going to read out here, where he says, trauma is not what happened to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathic witness. So that really sums up for me just how important the relationship is, because trauma comes about, according to Levine, when that witness wasn't there, or there wasn't somebody to really empathise with the person and really hear their pain and really capture that horrific trauma. So as therapists, through the relationship and being able to relate at depth, it helps us to really empathise with our clients, and for our traumatised clients to receive that empathy so they can tell the story of some of the horrors that they've experienced.
I like that quote. I've always liked the idea of some level therapists are witnesses, that, whether that's in bereavement work or in trauma work, that we are there to help witness to some extent what the client went through, and to be with them in the recanting of their story.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the video, I go on to tell a story of a piece of client work that I did, where that was very much what my role was to be the witness of my client's really difficult upbringing in her family and the dynamics, and how we concluded that how that witness was just so important because she hadn't been witnessed. So yes, the video talks more about that client case.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's more and more evidence to state that, if a client is believed, if there's someone who's listening to them who will be with them, that it does aid to some extent the recovery and the regeneration of a person who's been through a traumatic event.
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes from like a single event trauma, but also more complex trauma or relationship trauma, where there was maybe early ruptures in that relationship. And what happens is the relational aspect of therapy then serves as a reparative relationship. So there can be repairing that happens through the relationship, and when a counsellor can really reach that relational depth. And much of what I talk about in the video is the capacity of the therapist to be able to be in relationship. And that means to be able to really be present and embodied and be able to regulate their own nervous system, to be able to really hold a client and hold all of those real difficulties that they share.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like this isn't just, and I can relate to this out of my own practice, this isn't just a empathic and intellectual connection that you have with the client. This is a visceral connection. You don't only think it, but you actually feel it as a whole-bodied experience, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a really great word to use, actually, because it really is when the therapist can really feel safe and at home in their own body, when they can really be still in their own body and really reach the depth of their own body, or they'll be able to create the relationship for their clients to be able to do that themselves. Because one of the aims of trauma recovery is about being safe within your body, not just safe within the environment, but really safe within your body, and to be able to be with yourself. So the therapist really needs to be able to be like that with themselves and to be able to really be at home in their own bodies, to be able to create that environment for their clients. Then their clients will be able to start internalizing that and to be able to start to develop that safety within themselves that they can then transfer into other relationships.
Yeah, I think I've always been fascinated by this idea of mirroring, the fact that if the therapist is safe and secure in their own world, then at some level that models what the client should feel. Is that something that you subscribe to?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk a little bit about actually those mirror neurons in the brain that they have really picked up. So we'll be picking them up from our clients. If our clients are quite dysregulated, and traumatized clients are likely to be dysregulated, or if that's that real hyper or the hypo more collapse, that we'll be picking that up ourselves and it can dysregulate us. And we might then go into our default mode of regulating, whether that might be becoming hypervigilant and stressed and anxious, or whether it's to shut down and start to dissociate even. So those mirror neurons work both ways. So by able to really working on yourself and knowing your own default, knowing whether you tend to default into that more hypo place or the hyper, helps you to understand yourself so you can regulate, and then your client will be regulating automatically in that co-regulated relationship, which really then mirrors the good enough parenting and the good enough dyadic relationship of the baby and parent.
Yeah, you see, I'm become more and more fascinated with this as I've read more and practiced more. And one of my default people I go to, of course, is Patricia Clarkson, who wrote the book The Therapeutic Relationship, and she talked about the repatriative style of the therapist. In other words, there was an element of parenting, and I wonder if you could just tease out what that means. For some people, parenting may mean, being told what to do and being kind of spoon-fed. But actually, what does it mean in terms of the therapeutic alliance?
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually, because we could really misunderstand it to think it is about being more maternal and telling somebody what to do. But if we think about the work of Winnicott, it's about really being able to hold that space, to be able to mirror the client. So, and when I say mirror, I'm talking about something different than the mirror neurons, but to be able to really show back to the client who they are through the eyes of the therapist, in a sense. If we can be really in our bodies and really calm and be able to hold all those difficult feelings, then we're creating that holding relationship. So our clients can maybe project onto us, or to be able to offload, or that unconsciously we might be really feeling those feelings of the trauma, and then through that relationship we can gently be handing that back to the client so they can then take back those parts of themselves and take back some of those really, really difficult feelings. So at the basic of the reparative relationship is about holding, but it's not just that, it's about doing it over a period of time. So it's really that longevity of the counselling relationship where the repairing happens. It's about the counselling turning up each week and being consistent, and that is the basics of the same time of the session and location and things like that, and in their manner, just that consistently, where over time the client will then start to internalise the counsellor. They'll be able to internalise that secure base and to feel safe within themselves, and it goes back to be able to really be with themselves.
Yeah, so one of the, I mean, I'm a real big fan of the work of Winnicott. And I think one of the interesting things is he talks about the real self and the false self, and the idea that the real self may be pushing against the parent, maybe acting out, maybe looking for a reaction, and part of the parent side, and he was talking about parenting per se here, part of the parenting side was to absorb that and be consistent. Does that transpose into the therapeutic relationship, the same kind of principles?
Yeah, absolutely. Where we are, there might be that empathic resonance that we might really, really pick up on. Speaking a bit more psychodynamically, the projective identification, where we just really feel the enormity of the feelings, and that might be, we might feel that hate that's come towards us, or more aggression, or it might be just overwhelm, and we might find as a therapist that we might want to rescue, or we might want to make it all better for the client, or it might feel too much for us. We might find ourselves wanting to push it back. So yeah, that can all really, really play out. And I do talk a little bit about that, and how it's important for therapists to really understand their patterns and to really know themselves. And I talk about what can really get in the way of the therapist being able to really, really hold the session, and to really hold the trauma, and to meet the client at depth. So yes, it's an invitation for therapists to just think about their own patterns, what can get in the way of those elements.
Just so important. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis put on the theory. There's a huge emphasis put on skills and techniques, but sometimes we can forget the necessary ingredient, which is the quality of the therapeutic relationship. And this is what we're talking about here, isn't it? The quality of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good point, because particularly as we're talking about trauma, because there's just such an explosion of trauma material out there these days in CPD courses, and quite structured trauma courses are a lot more directive, actually. So working in quite a structured way with trauma, it's quite directive. And what we don't want is for the therapist to then start to lose contact with the therapeutic relationship. That sometimes there is a bit more structure required working with trauma clients, that we don't want them to be re-traumatized. So we might need to really pause what they're saying, for example, but not to lose the relationship. And also with working with trauma, particularly in phase 1 trauma, there's a big emphasis on resourcing and sharing skills and techniques and resources and strategies with clients for them to stabilize and to be safe for the trauma work. But again, we don't want to forget about the relationship in all of that. So the relationship really needs to run through and to be fundamental, and then everything else comes from that place rather than replacing it in any way.
I mean, this sounds like a really, really important lecture for those who are working with traumatized clients. People may have done trauma-informed courses, but I'm getting a sense that this may be an ingredient or an antidote even to to working with clients and missing part is where I'm coming from. Thinking about the relationship and thinking about the therapist's own reactions. What do you think people will learn from your lecture, Kate?
Yeah, well, the main parts of the lecture are to really identify key factors of trauma that challenge the connection with the relationship. So whilst I'm really advocating the relationship, a client that's had experienced complex trauma might find that actually a real threat. So I touch on that in the video about how we can really work within the relationship. Some clients might actually really view it as a threat and something that's really unsafe. To consider how relational depth can be a healing factor in trauma, which is the main part of it. But really importantly is to identify your default position as a therapist. And we're going to be exploring the polyvagal theory ladder and what you can do to enhance an embodied presence for relating at depth.
Wow, is all I can say to that. Wow. I personally can't wait for the lecture. I'm kind of lucky because I get to see them first before we broadcast them. But I just think it's such an important lecture. I'd call on people, if they can, to view it. Sounds like incredible work. Thank you so much for making this. And Kate Williams, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you to Kate Williams. Thank you very much, Rory, as always, for hosting that interview. And if you liked what you heard from Kate and you want more information on building relational depth with clients, you can hear her whole lecture, and you can get that from our Counsellor CPD library. If you remember, log in and the information is there. If you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD library, go to counsellingtutor.com. That is for qualified practitioners only. If you are a student, we do have student resources there as well. This has been episode 208 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
We started off by talking about the importance of rapport in counselling, that bridge to building a therapeutic relationship. We went on then to discuss managing your inner therapist, harnessing your superpower and using it in a way that's appropriate for the world of therapy. And then we finished with a wonderful interview with Kate Williams, who taught us and shared with us how to build relational depth with clients. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.